So let's go ahead, Bob, and get started with the prayers for tonight. Again, we've been reciting the Heart Sutra because this is the text that we're studying in this course. I don't know if you've had a chance to read. I'm sorry?
Do you want to do the recorded prayers tonight, or do you want to chant?
If you want to do the recording, that would be great. If you have it all lined up.
I've got it set up to do.
And the shared sound and what have you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So if everyone wants to just come along or chant along with Yangtze Rinpoche and the students of Maitripa College, and you can turn your mics off so it doesn't become too much of a cacophony, but you can do that on your own, and then we'll do some additional prayers.
Here we go.
No, I browse into the together with the great humanity among the great humanity of Bodhisattva and the Bagawan was a good and a concentration on the categories of Minagaba from Brahma also and the Bodhisattva Mahasava Look upon my daily practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and behold, I aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Shariputra, therefore, because there is no nothing, Bodhisattvas rely on the wisdom, perfection of wisdom, mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also magnificently completely awaken to unsurpassable perfect, completely enlightened in rely on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the No, I browse into the I am the legend of the I.
Okay.
Okay, Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. We do the short mandala offering, making this vast pure offering so we can receive blessings to actualize the path. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then we'll do refuge in bodhicitta as usual, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shog. Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation just to clarify our motivation as well as focus the mind a bit. So spend the first few minutes working with the breath, whatever way suits your mind, to try to develop a bit more focus, let go of whatever distractions might be in the mind. And then I'll lead you in a short meditation after that to refresh our bodhicitta motivation. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation. So now let's set our motivation together for this evening's class. And recall again that this topic of the Heart Sutra is taught in the context of the Bodhisattva path. Without this wisdom realizing emptiness, it's true that those who are on the Hinayana path, who seek their own liberation, cannot achieve that goal. But we want to go beyond that goal. We want to use these teachings on emptiness to help ourselves to achieve the greatest possible state of Buddhahood, the culmination of our own potential. And we do that not just because we will benefit from that, though that's certainly true, but because then we will be of the greatest use to others. This bodhisattva path is based on the idea of cherishing other beings, of holding them as most dear, most precious. So we want to generate in our hearts right now this very compassionate, altruistic intention that seeks to help all beings to achieve the state of Buddhahood, and the recognition that to do that most effectively, we have to become Buddhas ourselves. Without becoming enlightened, we simply won't have the compassion, wisdom, skill and means, and so on to be able to benefit those beings. So generate this motivation of bodhicitta, thinking that you're here tonight to engage in these teachings with your eyes set on that greatest result, the result of your own enlightenment. So then you will be fully qualified to lead others to that state. Again, feel great joy in your heart at cultivating this motivation and feel the power of this mind to benefit all sentient beings as we generate it right now. Oh, we've got a full Zoom room tonight. So, welcome everyone again. Thanks for joining. This is our third class on the Heart Sutra. We have a total of 8 classes lined up, take us through the end of February. And so let's get back into where we were. We're working with the text. Again, all of the texts and that are available through the materials link at the page at TNL's website that you probably came in through for tonight's teaching. We were working on our way into the text already. I'm going to do just a short little detour to go back to some points from last week's session. And I hope people don't mind, but I felt like there was perhaps some, based on some of the input I got, some things that might be good to clarify. One was in terms of this 4 seals of Buddhism, which again, these were the preliminary topics that I finished off last week, or thought I had finished off last week, that I want to revisit. And specifically looking at the 3rd seal. Recall that again, this is where there is the greatest difference in these various philosophical tenets of Buddhism. Again, the philosophical tenets are a way of looking back at everything that the Buddha taught and dividing it up into certain categories on the basis of certain teachings that the Buddha gave. This 3rd one is the one that's most debatable. You know, when we say all phenomena are empty and selfless, what does this mean? And so I'm going to share with you some from a couple of different books, some of which again are on your book list, but kind of help you to maybe flesh out an understanding of that a little bit better. When these 4 seals are presented, they're generally presented from the point of view of what is the most common way that all Buddhist tenet systems would adhere to them, with the understanding that there are going to be differences, especially in that 3rd one, for some of the more advanced tenet systems, especially the one that we're studying in this course, which again is the middle way point of view, the Madhyamaka, specifically the Prasangika, the consequence school of the middle way. So let's take a look at what is said by Khensur Jampa Tekchok. This book is on your book list. If you, I find it a very, very useful book in studying emptiness. Here he says, the 3rd of the 4 seals is that all phenomena are empty and selfless. This indicates their ultimate nature. When the 4 seals are explained in a way that is common to all Buddhist schools, and that's what I went through when I went through this previously, empty refers to the lack of a permanent, unitary, and independent person that does not depend on causes and conditions and is a different entity from the 5 aggregates. Again, the most common example that's used for this is the idea of an Atman. Atman is literally translated as soul in the English language. It's referring to something that is other than the mind and the body, that is completely independent. Again, the Buddha says that this is an acquired conception, but nonetheless, this is something that many of us may have from what we've been exposed to in this life in terms of whether we have a belief in this idea of a soul or Atman, something that is completely apart from the mind and body. Selfless, he goes on to say, refers to the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. This is a subtler view of a self that we're negating. And this is, both of these are set out in terms of the person. We're going to look at shortly, well, it said all phenomena are selfless and empty. Well, how do we get from persons to that? And I talked about it a little bit last time, but I want to clarify some of that. But anyway, this idea of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person, here he says it's the same entity as the aggregates. We don't mean it's utterly identical to them, but we mean it's kind of in the same kind of composite of the aggregates. And yet it has some distinctions nonetheless. And I'm going to get into some slides that explain this a little bit better, especially, anyway, you'll see it shortly. It says all other phenomena are empty or selfless of being objects of use of such false selves. So when we talk about these selves not existing, the way that we can extend it out to phenomena from the point of view of the lowest tenet systems where we have everything in common with them, the way that they would explain it is that objects of use like the computer and all these various things that are in our lives, they aren't objects of use by those 2 types of selves because neither of them exist. We are empty of having a permanent, unitary, independent self. We are also selfless in terms of there being a lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. Both of those are refuted. And again, all the Buddhist schools, except I think there's again a small subgroup of the Vaibhashika that don't go so far as to refute this self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But essentially all Buddhist tenet systems, generally, we can say, share that view. So at the least kind of or the way in which we could have some agreement among all these tenet systems, there's going to be that idea that persons lack these identities. Therefore, phenomena that could be used by that person or perceived by that person or known by that person can't exist because that person doesn't exist. Again, they would still posit that people exist, and they posit in the lower tenet systems that people exist in a much coarser way than what Prasangika posits. We're going to get into that much later in this course. But know that this is kind of how it is explained, is that you can't have objects of use of such people because those selves, those people don't exist. There is no self-sufficient, substantially existent person. There is no permanent, unitary, independent person. Again, we talked about these previously. We're going to see them a little bit more in what I'm sharing tonight. But nonetheless, this is the idea of how we can say in that third seal that all phenomena are empty and selfless. Whoops, sorry, went 2 slides. Now, getting to refine this view of what we mean by the substantially existent or self-sufficient person, I did want to share a little bit more from Emptiness Yoga by Jeffrey Hopkins. It isn't on your book list, but it's a wonderful book if you can find it. It's a little bit more experiential than his other tome, which is Meditation on Emptiness. But he says, if a substantially existent or self-sufficient person does not exist, well, what would they look like? What would it be if they did exist? What would that be? Because if we're negating it and saying it doesn't exist, well, still, we have an idea that it does. This is a level of ignorance that we all do have. As I mentioned with this last week, we do have this innately, whereas the other one, again, the coarser view of a permanent, unitary, independent self, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that's an acquired view. That's not actually something that the Lama Tsongkhapa says that we are born with. So he goes on to say, when I say or think, my mind, my body, my book, and so on, I seem to be first. And then the thing owned appears to depend on me. The I is the owner, the controller. It seems that this I does not depend on the mind or body. Rather, the mental and physical aggregates, essentially the mind and the body, we're going to get into the aggregates a little bit later. The mind and the body seem to depend on the I instead of the I depending on the mind or body. He says, due to the great force with which we conceive this, the I and the mental and physical aggregates or components appear to be, respectively, the controller, the I is a controller, and the mind and body are what are controlled. The apprehension of the aggregate seems to depend on apprehending the I, whereas the actual fact, and this is again according to the highest tenet system that we're studying, the Prasangika Madhyamaka, the consequence middle way school, the actual fact is that the apprehension of the I depends on apprehending the mental and physical aggregates. And even the lower systems would say that this is to some degree true, that there is an I that is apprehended on the basis of the mind and body, that the mind and body are intimately involved in establishing that I. This is the way that the innate mind that misconceives self-sufficient existence sees the I, is that it is dependent, that the aggregates depend on it rather than it depending upon the aggregates. So this is the false conception of a self that is involved in the third seal, especially when we talk about, phenomena and persons would be included in that being selfless. So he says, thus, self-sufficient existence isn't just a philosophical concept, it is innate, born with us due to the conditioning of former actions and afflictive emotions. We innately misperceive our own nature. And in fact, because it is innate, this is why it is established by all of the tenet systems below Prasangika Madhyamaka as being what will free you from samsara, what will help you to attain liberation, is realizing the lack of this self-sufficient self. And he goes on to say, though the I and the aggregates are apprehended as being basically different within this idea, the difference isn't necessarily that of entity. That's why, again, Geshe Jumpa Tekshok said they're the same entity, but rather of what depends on what. For example, and this is the example that I used last week, and I thought it would be best to have it straight from Jeffrey Hopkins' mouth. For example, in a store, the salespeople have to do whatever the head salesperson says. He or she orders them about. They do not tell the head salesperson what to do. They have to ask his or her permission. Should I do this? And so on. This is how a sales department would be run. Within this context, they are dependent on the head salesperson and not he or she on them. Of course, in other ways, the head salesperson has to depend on them to get things sold and so forth, but that's not the point here. The point is that the head salesperson is a salesperson, not completely different in character from the workers in the store. Yet, that head salesperson is in a position of controlling the other workers, is kind of the person who's in charge, the boss. And this is that whole concept that we do have this innately, thinking there's sort of a boss in charge of all of this. It's kind of together with all of this. It has its own distinctions from it, but the point is that it is a part of the group. It's part of the sales department. And then he goes on to finalize this. He says, according to Jamyang Shepa, whose text he's commenting on in that book, Emptiness Yoga, this is the way in which a person appears to be a substantial or self-sufficient entity. Like a boss within a group, the I seems to control mind and body. Going back to Khensur Jampa Tekchok, he says, in distinction from the lower schools, Prasangikas say that both empty and selfless, what we just talked about, and I didn't talk about empty quite as much because, again, that's relatively easy to refute, but selfless in terms of this lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, it's a little bit trickier. So when we say empty and selfless in the third seal, Prasangikas say that that refers to the lack of inherent existence, and that both terms apply to all phenomena, not just to the person. See what happens in the higher tenet schools, and this is the distinction between, and this isn't a class on tenets. Again, there will be a class on tenets taught by Venerable George a little bit later. But the idea is that when we look at the lower tenet systems versus the higher tenet, the Hinayana versus the Mahayana tenet systems go examining the nature of phenomena beyond the person. Whereas the lower tenet systems are satisfied with just looking at a person and refuting some false ways that the person is believed to exist and not examining phenomena any further. As we saw earlier, they're simply refuting that those phenomena other than the person are objects of use of such a person. They're not going to, well, how does my computer actually exist? Or how does the body actually exist? Or how does the mind actually exist? Or any phenomenon that is not the person, the self. So the idea here again is that there is a deeper investigation that happens in the Mahayana schools. So Prasangika in particular defines a selflessness of phenomena as being a lack of inherent existence of phenomena other than the person. But they also say that the selflessness of persons is the lack of an inherently existent person. It's the same thing that's being negated. It's just a matter of whether we are looking at persons as the object or whether we're looking at phenomena other than persons. So this is kind of a unique view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, and I'm not going to go into all the other refinements. We went through a few of those last time. I'm not going to go into that in great detail because, again, this isn't a course on tenets, but it is important that we emphasize at least a few of these because if we had to, have some reasons for this, why would we even need to look at these? Well, for one thing, some of us may have that acquired conception of a permanent, unitary, independent self, and it is important that we refute that along the way. Because if we have some belief or conviction in that, it needs to be addressed. And it's also a valuable stepping stone to help us to get to the subtlest view of how persons and phenomena exist. So the second one, this idea of, again, a lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, as we just saw in what I shared from Jeffrey Hopkins, this is innate. This is something that all beings are born with. We're all born with certain levels of ignorance, and those levels of ignorance do play a role in causing us some confusion. They're not the root of our suffering, according to Prasangika. The root of our suffering is the misconception of the person and all phenomena as being inherently existent. This is what we're going to work with mostly in this course. But this second one in particular is a valuable stepping stone to get us to address one level of ignorance that we do have operative in our minds, and that needs to be removed along the path as well. So it's not just a futile exercise of going, oh, well, let's entertain this idea of how the person exists or doesn't exist, and then this one, and then let's go on to the real one, or the one that is the final view. It's just not a meaningless exercise. It actually has great benefit. So it trains us in kind of taking a look at the person in particular, because as we're going to see a little bit later in our study of this text, everything revolves around the person. We are misperceiving phenomena, but the biggest misconception has to do with I, with how I exist. Because when I think I exist in this fictitious way, then I relate to things that are mine or that are in my world in a distorted way. So this is something that's going to be coming up a little bit later, but I wanted to revisit that idea from the third seal, just to make sure that people are clear that, what that is saying, that it is including all phenomena, but in the lower tenet systems, that's in a very indirect way, because they're mainly concerned with the person. They don't really examine phenomena. In the higher tenet systems, we do examine phenomena, and we do take it to a deeper level. As was said in that slide, when Prasangikas say that all phenomena are empty and selfless, they're not just referring to these coarser ways that the lower tenet systems say, but they are going to this full extent of what they refute, which is the inherent existence of the person and other phenomena. So again, this is just something I thought I would revisit. Let me finish off this one slide that I had started from Kensur Jampa Tekchok. So he says here, this refers again to the lack of inherent existence, and that both terms apply to all phenomena, not just to the person. Here we see that the Prasangika view of the ultimate nature of all phenomena differs from that of the lower schools. This is how they would redefine, again, that third seal when they talk about things being both empty and selfless. Of the four Buddhist tenet systems, he says, two are fundamental, meaning Hinayana vehicle schools, and two are Mahayana schools. The Hinayana ones, what he calls the fundamental vehicle schools, Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, again, I gave you those names on some slides previously, are so called because their tenets mainly outline the basis, path, and result for the practitioners of the Hinayana vehicle who seek to become arhats. This is true, they're called that because that's their main path, but they do teach a path to Buddhahood. What distinguishes them again from the Mahayana is this deeper investigation into the nature of phenomena beyond the person. These schools, he says, assert a coarse and a subtle selflessness of the person, but they do not assert a selflessness of phenomena in the way that the upper schools do. Again, they have that way of talking about it in relation to the third seal, but it's really not an investigation into the nature of phenomena. And why do they do that? Why do they not assert a selflessness of phenomena? Because they say that there is a self of phenomena. They say phenomena are just fine. They exist in the way that they appear. No problem there. For the lower schools, they don't get into that investigation. It's the Mahayana schools that say, I've been examining the person. Well, let me take a look at the phenomena in my world. And do they exist in the way they appear? And this is, of course, is what the Heart Sutra and the Prajnaparamita Sutras, all of them, are pointing to, is that there is a falsity in the way that things appear versus how they exist. Okay, so again, this is just a bit of a preview too of where we're going with this text. Nevertheless, these lower schools do accept the teaching of the four seals that all phenomena are empty and selfless. And he reiterates what I had said previously. I just want to share this in a couple of different, from a couple of different points of view and, make it hit home perhaps. They do this by agreeing that all phenomena are selfless because they are empty of being objects of use of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. We could say again that they are also empty of being objects of use of a permanent, unitary, independent person. So all phenomena are empty and selfless in that way, again, being objects of use of fictional people. Those fictional people are refuted, so therefore the objects of use of such fictional people wouldn't exist. In other words, the selflessness of the person is an attribute of everything that exists, not just the person. Because of this extension of the person into the world around us as using all the objects, utilizing them, knowing them, again, apprehending them. So we can say that there's an extension that way. It's not as deep as what the Mahayana schools are doing. The two Mahayana schools are once more the Chittamatra, the mind only, and the Madhyamaka, the middle way school. And the latter has two branches, Svatantrika and Prasangika. Again, this is the one that we're studying, the final one there, Prasangika, Madhyamaka. All of these accept a coarse and subtle selflessness of the person. In addition, they assert a selflessness of phenomena. So this is the thing, is they're going into a deeper investigation of not just how does the person exist, but how do, again, all the things in my world that are non-persons, how do they exist? So that led us into, again, last week, one more little bit. There aren't many slides for this, but I want to reiterate then, when we got into this discussion that was the final topic for the context of our study, the types of selflessness, we were reiterating that there are two types of selflessness then. And one is the selflessness of persons that we've already been discussing to a large degree. The other is the selflessness of phenomena, meaning they're phenomena other than persons. So that's, again, selflessness of persons taught in all four tenet systems. Selflessness of phenomena, phenomena other than persons is what that means, because phenomena usually means everything that exists. Here we're talking about things other than persons, is taught only in the Mahayana tenet systems, Chittamatra and Madhyamaka, the mind only. So this is a little bit from Jeffrey Hopkins. Now, you know, this gets to be a wordplay here, but it says phenomena, and that's why I put in brackets, that is, all existence or objects of knowledge. Everything that exists is divided into persons and phenomena, with the latter phenomena meaning phenomena other than persons. So it's weird to say phenomena is divided into persons and phenomena. Well, how do you do that? Because the first phenomena means everything that exists. The second is only things that are other than persons. So then you have persons and all phenomena other than persons. And then he goes on to say, objects are so divided because according to Prasangika Madhyamaka, adherence to the inherent existence of persons and adherence to the inherent existence of other internal phenomena, such as the body, are the two principal binders of beings in psychic existence. Of course, and we are also involved in external phenomena that are outside of our continuum that we adhere to. But it is true that these are the ways in which we mostly get caught up in our going from life to life. The main one being the adherence to the inherent existence of the person. That's why that's isolated. But nonetheless, these are operative in keeping us in samsara, keeping us going from life to life. Persons are the enjoyers or users, and other phenomena are the enjoyed or the used. So we still can talk about them in that context of the persons are the users, phenomena other than persons are what are used and enjoyed. But nonetheless, we can divide them up because there are different roles that they do have different roles they play in our misconceptions arising. But again, according to Prasangika Madhyamaka, it's the same idea that we are misconceiving, the same sort of object of refutation or negation. And that's what he goes on to talk about shortly. So here he gives kind of a delineation for Prasangika Madhyamaka, what we mean by these selflessness of persons, or what he calls here personal selflessness, and what he calls selflessness of phenomena, or selflessness of phenomena other than persons. The non-inherent existence of persons is the personal selflessness, which is Pudgala Naratmya, and the non-inherent existence of other phenomena such as mind, body, hand, house, mountain, whatever, computer, is the selflessness of other phenomena, dharma nairatmya. This is again a selflessness of dharma meaning here all phenomena, a selflessness of the person, Pudgala. Pudgala is the person that migrates from life to life and so on. According to Prasangika Madhyamaka, then, the two selflessnesses of persons and other phenomena are not divided by way of different objects of negation. In other words, we're not negating one view of the self of persons that is different than the view of the self of phenomena. It's both viewing them as inherently existent. Whether we talk about persons or phenomena other than persons, the way we are adhering to them, holding them, that becomes problematic for us is that they are inherently existent. And we'll be exploring this idea of what does inherent existence mean as we go through the course. So they're not divided by way of having something different that we're negating for each of those two bases, but rather by way of classes of objects that are the basis of the quality of non-inherent existence. Over here we have persons, they are lack inherent existence. Over here we have phenomena other than persons. They too lack inherent existence. We're not negating anything different. Why this is pointed out is because all of these lower schools say that there is a difference. When we look at persons, we refute one thing, and again, that was that view of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and the coarser one of that, permanent, unitary, independent self. But this subtle one is the one that, as I pointed out earlier, this is what most of the lower schools say you have to refute for your own individual liberation, for you to attain nirvana. And of course, in the Mahayana systems, they say that there's a selflessness of phenomena involved in that, but it's only Prasangika Madhyamaka that says whether you're talking about the person or whether you're talking about phenomena other than the person, it's the same thing we're negating. to get to liberation or to get to Buddhahood, enlightenment. We have to refute this inherent existence of everything that exists. Because if we don't do that, we're never going to attain that goal. These other realizations will not get you there alone. Nonetheless, as I pointed out earlier, they are valuable stepping stones. And to that end, I'm going to send along to Mary after tonight's class the meditations that come out of the basic program course on the Lam Rim that was taught in Italy. And it's got 2 very short meditations on both of those coarser views of a self according to Prasangika Madhyamaka. How do you refute an independent, partless or unitary permanent self? How do you refute a self-sufficient, substantially existent self? And so you'll get a chance to work with those. Even though they're not the main topic of this, I want to kind of give some I don't know, attention to them because we don't talk about them quite as much. And in this context, it is useful to kind of investigate them a little bit to see that they can be used to some degree as stepping stones to help us to refine our view of emptiness or selflessness to get to what is being taught in this text. And of course, you'll be given meditations to work with that at a later time because that's an important part of our doing this course as well, is to be able to try to discern for ourselves what it means to lack inherent existence. So I hope that was useful just to kind of get into a little bit deeper way of talking about that before we go on to examining the text. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did get into the text last week. We got a fair ways in because I skipped over some pages that seemed a little bit peripheral to what our studies have to be about. We're in the middle of page 9. In the middle of page 9, we have this preliminary stanzas. It's actually a single stanza that is introduced. And then we go on to the actual sutra on the next page. So let's go ahead and take it off screen there for that. And let me pull up on the screen the actual sutra. Let me hit the share button here. This, by the way, is the meditation 46, lack of a permanent unitary independent self. This is what you'll be getting. You can retrieve from the website probably within a day or so. Mary should be able to have that out there. So let's go to the commentary. Again, we're on the middle of page 9. We see that with regard to, again, this second part, the meaning of the parts of the Heart Sutra, there are 2 sections. We have the preliminary stanzas and the actual sutra. It says there for under the preliminary stanzas regarding the first, in great monasteries such as Sera Monastery and Drepung Monastery, which again are still active monasteries, before reciting the sutra, it is customary to recite these verses of praise and obeisance. It's just a single verse. I don't think they mean lines of praise. That's why it was plural. So it is nice if you can insert this into your recitation of the Heart Sutra, where you say initially, I bow down to the mother of the conquerors of the 3 times, the perfection of wisdom inexpressible by words or thoughts, which is unproduced and unceased, like the entity of the sky, the object of the wisdom of unique knowledge. So again, there are different translations of this in some of the other texts that are on your list if you've been looking at any of the other commentaries. But this one, again, is talking about making homage to the mother of the conquerors. The mother of the conquerors is the perfection of wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, by which all the Buddhas are born. All the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, all 3 times. This perfection of wisdom is said to be inexpressible by words or thoughts. Nonetheless, we can talk about it because we can point to it. We can, line our minds so that we eventually get to this non-conceptual wisdom that realizes this. And at that point, it is inexpressible by words because it's beyond concepts. But nonetheless, we can talk about it in general by saying it's not produced, it's not ceased, meaning it's not inherently produced or inherently ceased. It's like the entity of the sky, just kind of pervading everywhere without any real, inherent qualities. The object of wisdom of the unique knowledge that we generate on the path. So again, we're going to just go through briefly what our author Tendar Larampa says about this verse. He says, it is said that these lines are words recited by the Buddha's son Rahula to his mother. The meaning is that the wisdom that goes and is gone beyond samsara does so by means of the wisdom that directly realizes emptiness. That wisdom is not an object that can be expressed by speaking words or thinking thoughts. And the way that it is known directly and the way that it actually exists as lacking any inherent existence perceived by that wisdom. So we can't talk about it in that way, but we can talk about it, from our conceptual vantage point. Because that wisdom is not created by way of its own entity, it is not destroyed, but like the expanse of the sky is the negation of being established by way of its own entity. Again, it's just this negation that is like, again, the expanse of the sky, the vast sort of uncompounded space, the negation of any sort of contact with anything. You have the negation of being established by way of its own entity. That negation that is emptiness is like in this completely indestructible sphere of reality. It pervades everywhere. That very thing which serves as the sphere of the unique knowledge of meditative equipoise being when someone is directly realizing emptiness. So that very thing that serves as the sphere for that is the mother that gives birth to all the conquerors of the three times. It is obeisance to the wisdom that knows emptiness directly. This is what we're paying homage to in that little verse, those lines. Going on to the next page, we get into the actual sutra. So there's really not much to say about that verse. It's just a nice way of remembering before we recite the Heart Sutra that this is what we're paying homage to. This is what we're actually trying to cultivate in our own minds, is the wisdom realizing emptiness directly that has these various qualities. So now we get into the actual sutra, and it's divided into two parts. There is the meaning of the title and the meaning of the text. And obviously the meaning of the text is going to be the lion's share of this. We're going to talk about the title of the sutra. And to do that, rather than going into the text right now, I think what I would prefer to do is to pull up the slides that I have for this, because the slides that I have will get into a little more detail. And again, all these slides I also make a PDF file of, so you can access them, send that along again to Mary to put out on the website. This was that preliminary stanzas. We're getting again into the meaning of the title. There's a few bits on why we even have the Sanskrit title. Again, recall that this is a Tibetan translation of the text that we're working from, and the Sanskrit title is there. And they keep the Sanskrit title in Sanskrit. They don't give it a, I mean, they give it a Tibetan name as well, but they nonetheless introduce it within the context of its Sanskrit name. So giving the Sanskrit title at the beginning of a Tibetan text serves to indicate, first of all, that its origin is authentic. It also demonstrates the tremendous respect that Tibetans traditionally have for the texts translated from the Indian language and for the Indian tradition itself. So these are two reasons why it's, introduced with a Sanskrit name of the text. Its authenticity and the respect for these amazing texts that came from India, from what His Holiness always refers to as the Nalanda tradition, Nalanda Monastery, a great seat of learning in India, where many of the great practitioners of the middle way view came from. So there's also a few more reasons that are set out, though, by Geshe Sultan Gyaltsen. This is a book that, again, you can download for free, called The Mirror of Wisdom. He gives two more reasons why there's a Sanskrit title that's retained in the translations of these texts when they came into Tibet. Firstly, it is believed the Buddhas of the past, present, and future give their teachings in Sanskrit. So by reading the title in Sanskrit, we plant the seeds of the source language of Dharma in our minds. Some people have studied Sanskrit. I've never studied Sanskrit. I don't have that working knowledge of it, but it is said to be the language of the Buddhas. It is what they give teachings in. So it is an important thing to pay some reverence to the Buddhas who taught it in that language, so we can plant the seeds of that language in our own minds and eventually realize the Dharma. The second reason is to help us remember the great kindness of what are called in Tibet the Lotsawas. Lotsawa is literally means, again, the eye of the world. It comes from a Sanskrit term that means that. These are the great translators, as it says there, who originally translated this and other sutras from Sanskrit into Tibetan. This was a huge effort that was made to bring in all of these Sanskrit texts and to then translate them into the Tibetan language so they could be studied by the Tibetan monastics and what have you. So again, it's also to remember the kindness of those beings who spent, no doubt, countless hours, translating all those Sanskrit texts into Tibetan. The Tibetans retained, oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. Okay, so we're still on the subject of the meaning of the title. Let's take a look at the title first in the Sanskrit. It's called the Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya. Okay, so let's take a look at the individual terms that are in there. And this actually is one of the questions on the quiz, the homework for this week, if you'd like to work with it. Bhagavati is the same term as Bagawan. It's just a female version of it. The suffix, or the suffix that is added at the end is to make it into a feminine noun. Bhagawan is a term we use for the Buddha. In this context, we could say that Bhagavati literally means sacred mother. And it refers specifically to the realization of emptiness in the mind of a Buddha. We are working with that being the perfection of wisdom. We're going to see a little bit later in one of the slides, what do we mean by perfection of wisdom? The actual perfection of wisdom is the realization of emptiness in the mind of a Buddha. While we can generate an approximation of that on the path, it's not the actual perfection of wisdom until we achieve enlightenment. That's what we mean by perfection when we say perfection of wisdom. So again, when we talk about the Bhagavati, the sacred mother, we're referring to the realization of emptiness in the mind of the Buddha, or we could say the perfection of wisdom within the mind of that Buddha. Prajna, this term prajna is wisdom. Paramita, we translate it as perfection. It literally means gone to the other shore, from the shore of conditioned existence that we are in our unenlightened state to the other shore, to transcend beyond to the shore of Buddhahood, of enlightenment. Hridaya is essentially heart or essence, kind of meaning that this is the heart or the essence of these teachings that help us to actualize this perfection of wisdom. So this is why it's frequently called the Heart Sutra, is because it has this Hridaya in the title. You'll notice that the word sutra isn't even on here. Geshe Ngawang Dakpa says the title in the language of India is the Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. In the title presented here in the Tibetan text, the word sutra isn't used, since it is assumed to be understood. It's just kind of implicit that it is a sutra. But to explain the title, he actually says it's better to do it by way of the Tibetan syllables, since they spell out the meaning more completely. So again, I'm not asking you to memorize the Tibetan syllables for the homework or exam or anything, but I think it is interesting to look at the Tibetan, and gives us some flavor of the Tibetan language and how they bring things in with a number of meanings behind the scenes. What I have in the first line up there where it says in the language of Tibet, this once more is what we call Wiley. Wiley is this person who essentially looked at the Tibetan characters and figured out a way to transliterate them into English alphabet. There's only like one or two very small problems that can occur occasionally, but he essentially, does this, has put together this whole structure so that we can look at English letters and know what the Tibetan letters are. It wouldn't be how it's pronounced, because Tibetan is a strange language, and it having prefixes and suffixes and subscripts and superscripts and all these various things. And all of those are indicated by English letters, but many of them aren't even pronounced. So this first part of it is literally pronounced, as it says in parentheses there, Chom Den De Ma. It's the same as Bhagavati. In the Tibetan, it's Chom Den De Ma. What do we mean by Chom? Chom is destroyer, to overcome or conquer. So let's take a look at what it is that we overcome or conquer through this Bhagavati, or what the Bhagavati has overcome or conquered. What is overcome here, according to, I think this is Geshe Dakpa, are the four maras. The Klesha Mara, which is the Mara of the afflictions, that's Sanskrit. The Skanda Mara, the Mara of the aggregates. Marana Mara, the Mara of death. And Devaputra Mara, the divine being Mara. Of all four of these, but we often use the word Mara and translate it as like demon, with the idea that you might think, oh, these are things outside of myself. Well, the first three are actually in your own continuum. They're the afflictions themselves. That's what we mean by the Klesha Mara. The Skanda Mara are the Mara of having body and mind, the aggregates, the various features and aspects of our mind and our body that we have in lifetime after lifetime. And we're going to again dissect the aggregates a little bit later when we get further into the sutra. The Marana Mara is the Mara of death. Of course, death is a part of our conditioned existence. We are born, is because we are born that we will die. Without a doubt, we are all, overcome by death one time or another. The only one that's something outside of ourselves, that is something that is not within our own continuum, is the Devaputra Mara. And that is actually said to be one of these gods, devas, that is the son of a deva, that comes and sort of strikes you, if you have some karma with that being, you can have some of these sort of effects on your mind. It's not, kind of supernatural sort of stuff necessarily, but it's the ways in which we might have created karma with other beings that ripen into them having a malevolent influence on our own minds. So again, this is one thing that we can say that is destroyed, that is overcome when we talk about chom dende, the syllable chom. Then goes on to say also what are overcome are what we call the two obscurations. Again, I'm going to be introducing these as we go through the text as well. The afflictive obscurations, or what are often called the obscurations to liberation. According to Prasangika Madhyamaka, this is the conception of inherent existence and what we call the seeds of that, meaning every time you have that conception that adheres to the person or phenomena other than persons as inherently existent, you plant a seed in your mental continuum that ripens into that conception occurring again. The conception of inherent existence and its seeds, and of course all the delusions that are built on that, we have to remove those first if we are going to move towards enlightenment. And those are what are the main goal of those on the Hinayana path, who only want to attain their individual liberation. You have to get rid of these, the afflictive obscurations, in order to achieve liberation. The knowledge obscurations, or what are often called obscurations to omniscience, omniscience being Buddhahood, the appearance of inherent existence in the stains of conceiving the two truths as different entities. This is a little bit harder to explain, but essentially what we are talking about is that through the force of the first type of afflictions, afflictive obscurations, the first type of obscurations that are the conception of inherent existence and its seeds, you have imprinted on your mind these latencies. These latencies give rise to a false appearance. So let me take it off screen for just a moment while I talk about this. So everything that appears to us, remember I mentioned how these higher schools of the Mahayana, they are looking at phenomena around us and saying, do they exist in the way they appear? Well, for Prasangika Madhyamaka, the false appearance that is going on is that everything around us and ourselves, anything that we entertain with any of our consciousnesses when we're not realizing emptiness, anything through the force of our ignorance, through these stains, they all appear to be inherently existent. They have that appearance of reality from their own side. Again, that's what we're going to be exploring as we go deeper and deeper into this text, is what does this really mean? What is it that we're really trying to refute? What does it mean to say things appear as inherently existent? But this is a part of the equation of why we are in the trouble that we're in. We've been having our ignorance since beginningless time. And every time we have that ignorance, it not only plants a seed for that ignorance, it gives us an imprint of that ignorance that gives rise to this false appearance. And then the false appearance reaffirms our misconception. And so we get caught up in this little trap of never really questioning this, because everything appears to exist on its own. And that's how we apprehend it. That's how we grasp at it. So we have an ignorant mind that is grasping at things to appear on their own, and we have the appearance of the things appearing on their own that we never question. So we have two factors that are keeping us from having a fully enlightened mind. The first that needs to be gotten rid of is our grasping at that as if it were true. And we can refute that through reasoning. We can refute that through understanding emptiness, as we're doing in this course. Once we have gotten rid of this ignorance that is the afflictive obscurations, all the seeds of that, we still have to address this false appearance. Things will still appear to be inherently existent. This is what blocks our attainment of enlightenment, because it keeps us seeing the duality of what are called the two truths. The truth of the emptiness of all phenomena, while things still do exist conventionally as conventional truths. Again, we will talk about the two truths a little bit later more. Don't think that you have to get all these concepts right off the bat here tonight. But these are kind of the two obscurations that a bodhisattva is intent upon removing. The first level has to be removed because we can never get to the subtler level without removing the coarser level. The coarser level are the ignorance and the seeds of ignorance that we essentially call the afflictive obscurations. Once we have removed those, we still have these subtler ones. And these cause that dualistic appearance, that false appearance. They have to be removed to completely clear our minds so that we can experience the omniscient state of a Buddha. There is a little handout that I'm going to introduce you to. I'm not going to go into it in great detail tonight, but it's a little handout that you do have out on the website that you may have downloaded already. It looks rather complicated, but I am going to be doing a full course on this little chart and intricacies of it that aren't on this chart following this course on the Heart Sutra. I'm going to talk about the paths and grounds of the middle way, the Mahayana schools and so on. So I'll be talking about this in more detail even in this course. But know that essentially the Bodhisattva begins to remove obscurations that are afflictive in nature right at this point here. I don't know if you can see the little cursor there where it says it's actually bubble number 7 down below. You see that little circle 7. That's when you go from being an ordinary bodhisattva to actually knowing emptiness directly and becoming a bodhisattva superior, or an arya. Arya is the Sanskrit word for having that superior knowledge. Okay, so that is where you enter the path of seeing. At the path of seeing, you begin again to remove those afflictive obscurations. They are not removed in their entirety for the bodhisattva until you get circle 8 down here. See where circle 8 is? That's a delineation that is between what we call the impure grounds of the path of meditation and the pure grounds of the path of meditation. At that point, once you've crossed that threshold, you begin this deeper work and you remove the knowledge obscurations or the obscurations to omniscience. When you completely remove those, you cross over the threshold that is circle 9, and circle 9 is where you become a Buddha, where you're no longer a sentient being. You've transcended sentient being state, and you are a Buddha, an omniscient being that can then work for the benefit of all beings. You'll notice on this chart that there is a little box where it reiterates what I just told you about afflictive obscurations and knowledge obscurations, what they are. Note that there are both acquired and innate forms of the afflictive obstructions or obscurations. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but essentially this is a nice little chart that you can refer to, especially later when we do introduce what are called the 5 paths, which again are these 5 that are delineated in this row here: path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and then the 5th, which is the resultant state of Buddhahood, the path of no more learning. I just wanted to introduce that to you and kind of mention that description of these obscurations or obstructions is on that chart so that you can be aware of that. So let me go back to where we were at before and see if I can complete this title at least of the text. So once more, back in the language of Tibet, it's Chom Den De Ma. Geshe Dakpa goes on to explain what den, the second syllable, means. It means to possess or to accomplish. So what is possessed, he says, are so it should say all of the higher attributes and qualities of a Buddha's omniscience. Geshe Dakpa specifically says what is possessed here are what are called the 6 most excellent qualities. Again, you don't have to know all this. I'm just giving you this additional information because it is nice to bring that to mind when we think about this text as encompassing all of that. We mean, by a Bhagavati or a Chomden Dema, that this is encompassed in all of that. And it is, as is said in the Sambuddhi. This is also from a text that you have access to, a free text that you can download. This first and second are having a powerful and pure form, having glory, having renown, having transcendental wisdom, and having perfect enthusiasm. These 6 are called fortune. They are the 6, great qualities that are possessed by this state of having accomplished this perfection of wisdom. So again, I'm not going into it in great detail. I'm just letting you know that this information is out there, things that Geshe Dakpa is referring to and so on in his commentary on this text. What does De mean? Chomden De means to transcend or go beyond. According to Geshe Dakpa, this is not explicitly part of Bhagavati when it was brought in from the Sanskrit, but it is implied in the term Bhagavati. It indicates that through this realization of the profound emptiness, one goes beyond samsara and nirvana even. One goes to, again, the non-abiding nirvana of Buddhahood. One is no longer caught up in either of those extremes. the extreme of conditioned existence that we are in samsara, nor the extreme of a solitary peace that we would experience if we were simply in nirvana, like they do on the individual path, the Hinayana path. Whoops, sorry, went 2 slides. The honorific term Bagawan, this is what Geshe Sultan Gyaltsen says, is also used to refer to other holy people. So the translators added the word de in Chomden De to the original Sanskrit to indicate that this wasn't just an ordinary Bhagawan, but a truly transcendent one. Sometimes you even see the term Bhagawan used in the Hindu tradition, the Vedic traditions, to refer to somebody who's a holy being. So this is, according to Geshe Gyaltsen, why that day was added that Geshe Dakpa said wasn't in the original Sanskrit. Kind of interesting to know that. Again, these aren't crucial terms for our understanding, but I think it does enhance the meaning of this title. The last one, Ma, simply means mother. Anytime you add a ma to the end of these words, nouns, and so on, it means the female version of it, and ma usually specifically meaning mother. Even in the term lama, I think it means superior, the most superior mother, the highest mother. When we talk about our lamas, they could be male or female, but we mean that they are the embodiment of that motherhood of the perfection of wisdom that gives rise to all future Buddhas and so on. So the perfection of wisdom is the mother again, because this teaching is the mother of all Buddhas. When this wisdom, which is like the mother, is united with bodhicitta, which is like the father, Buddhas are produced. We combine wisdom and method. This is how we actually attain Buddhahood. But the wisdom side is always identified with the mother. That's why we've been using this female version, Chomden De Ma, why we've looked at Bhagavati, is that wisdom in the Buddhist tradition is affiliated with the female, the feminine energy, whereas the method side of it, bodhicitta, compassion, and so on, is usually associated with the male side, the masculine energy, if you will. So we go on with the title, because that wasn't all of the title. That was the first bit that was equivalent to Bhagavati, Chomden Dema. Now we go on to the other part, is Sherab Ki Paro Tu Chinpe. It has the same meaning as Prajna Paramita. Sherab is wisdom, Ki means of, Paro means perfection, Paro Tu Chin is usually perfection. The idea is the perfection of wisdom that is the Bhagavati, that is the realization of emptiness in the mind of a Buddha. Here's where I am going to introduce what we mean by perfection of wisdom in different contexts. There are actually said to be 4 divisions of the perfection of wisdom. They're called nominal because one of these isn't actually a perfection, or I'm sorry, 3 of these aren't perfection of wisdom. One of them isn't even a wisdom. The other one, well, actually 2 of them, well, we won't get into all that. Let's go through them one by one. What do we mean by Prajnaparamita, perfection of wisdom? The actual perfection of wisdom is only the first one. That's the resultant perfection of wisdom. That's why, again, that's what I was referring to earlier when we talked about the title in Sanskrit, is that we are referring there and paying homage in the title to the perfection of wisdom in the mind of a Buddha, the omniscient mind of a Buddha that knows the emptiness of all phenomena, that has perfected that wisdom. Path perfection of wisdom is a consciousness as well. It is a wisdom, but it is what causes us to realize emptiness in the mind of a Buddha by having it occur in the continuum of the mind of a bodhisattva. So what we are trying to initially cultivate, of course, is a path perfection of wisdom as a bodhisattva to realize emptiness. It's not a fully qualified perfection of wisdom. Why? Because it's not the resultant state of Buddhahood. It's not that actual perfection of wisdom, but nonetheless a very important one. This is the mind from which Buddhas are born, is the bodhisattvas realizing emptiness on the path. Scriptural perfection of wisdom are the speech or the texts that teach it. So here we can say that we are looking at a scriptural perfection of wisdom. That's what the Heart Sutra is. But again, what it's referring to is the perfection of wisdom that is the actual perfection of wisdom, the omniscient mind of a Buddha that has realized that fully. Then we have the last one, which again isn't related to these except as the object of that perfection of wisdom. It is called natural perfection of wisdom. And what does it refer to? It refers to emptiness itself. It's the natural perfection of wisdom because it is the natural quality of all phenomena, everything that exists, persons, non-persons, what have you. So these are the four ways that we could use perfection of wisdom. And again, they're nominal divisions because three of them, the second through the fourth, are not the actual perfection of wisdom. And again, as I was trying to point out, one of them is a consciousness, the second one that is not yet fully developed into the mind of a Buddha. The third one are the texts or the speech that teach it. They come from the minds of the Buddhas, but they are not minds per se. And then emptiness itself is the object of that wisdom. It is the what is to be realized, that quality of all phenomena lacking inherent existence. All right, so we're almost done with the title. The last part of the title is Ningpo. Ningpo has the same meaning as Hridaya. It means the heart or the essence. Since this sutra in particular is the essential teaching on emptiness and the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So once more, recall that there are these three main ones that are sometimes called the three mothers: the vast that is 100,000 stanzas, intermediate of 25,000, brief of 8,000. The Heart Sutra is said to contain the essential advice of all of these sutras. So that's what we're studying. And that's what's in the title, is this idea of it being the Bhagavati, the Chomdendema, this enlightened wisdom of a Buddha that is the perfection of wisdom, that is the essence of this, that is the essential teaching on this, that again is given by Avalokiteshvara in the words that he recites. Let me take it off of here. And let me go back to the text for just a minute so we can get grounding in that and maybe do just a little bit more before we take our break. Let me review what it said about the title, the meaning of the title. Again, this is on page 10 of your text. That which in the language of India is Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya, when translated into Tibetan, and this is the English given here, the heart of the transcendent and victorious perfection of wisdom. And that is the title of the sutra. Regarding the purpose for stating the title, if a name were not given, there would be no way of finding out which sutra it was. That's a bit obvious. Why do you give a name? Because you have to know what it is. Hence, the name is stated at the beginning. Regarding the word heart, for example, the place where all the consciousnesses that pervade the entire body gather is called the heart. In the tantric teachings, they say that the heart chakra is where all of these winds and consciousnesses gather at the time of death. In the same way, all the meanings of the vast, the intermediate, and the condensed Mother Sutras, those three main ones, again, 100,000, 25,000, 8,000, they're all gathered here, just like those consciousnesses gather at the heart. Therefore, it is called the Sutra of Sutras, or the Heart of Sutras. All of the intentions of the Transcendent Victor, the Buddha, are gathered in this sutra. As Tsongkhapa says in his Small Essence of Good Explanations, whatever you have spoken begins from dependent arising, which we will talk about later in this course. It is one of the main reasonings for realizing that inherent existence isn't possible, and is for the purpose of passing beyond sorrow, attaining some level of nirvana. Again, the nirvana that Hinayanists attain is not what we're aiming for, but we're aiming for a state beyond sorrow that is a non-abiding nirvana, the state of Buddhahood. You have no activities that do not bring peace. So again, this is speaking to the Buddha. Essentially, this is his main teaching. This is what qualifies Buddhism even greater than any of the other teachings in the Buddhist sutras, is the teachings on emptiness that are the understanding one gains through analyzing dependent arising. Goes on to say, the transcendent victor thinks only of methods by which sentient beings may pass beyond sorrow. And the method by which they pass beyond sorrow is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And that's, again, true. One has to realize emptiness. You wouldn't have the perfection of wisdom when you're a Hinayana practitioner, but you have to realize emptiness to even attain the solitary peace of nirvana. Of course, to attain Buddhahood, you absolutely need it. Therefore, it is called the essence of wisdom. That which passes beyond sorrow is the reality of sentient beings' minds. Their minds go beyond the sorrowful state, being under the control of afflictions and so on. Therefore, it is called the essence of Tathagatas. When it is understood that everything in the sutras and tantras only sets forth methods for purifying the taints of sentient beings' minds, it is realized that all the teachings are without contradiction, because even as we saw earlier when we talked about some of them being more provisional and needed to be interpreted, they are all stepping stones to get us to that final wisdom. Therefore, because all the Buddhas of the three times are born from the wisdom realizing emptiness, that wisdom is referred to with the term mother. Again, the sacred mother. That is the idea behind Bhagavati. This next little paragraph I'm going to skip over, and we're going to have our break very shortly. Let's just finish off this one little bit. It says, in general, with respect to going beyond paramita, again, going to the other shore, beyond a common being is a superior, an Arya, and I'll explain those maybe in next week's class a little bit better, so you have an idea of what that means. I already did refer to it when I put up the chart of the Bodhisattva's path, the Mahayana path. You become an Arya when you attain a direct realization of emptiness, a non-conceptual awareness. So going beyond a common being is to get to a superior being. Going beyond the conventional is to the ultimate. What is beyond samsara is nirvana, and what is beyond ignorance is knowledge. Just different ways of thinking about going from our current state of where we are to something beyond that. Of course, Buddhahood being the complete destination that is beyond that, transcending to that place, going beyond our unenlightened state to the state of Buddhahood. From among those, the last is the referent of the term wisdom gone beyond, going beyond ignorance to knowledge, to full knowledge that we have when we attain Buddhahood. According to the Chittamatrans, again, we talked about them previously, and I don't really have too much more to share on Chittamatrans, and talked about a little bit last week. I couldn't find any additional information to talk about. Some of the things that were brought up, I think, in the question by Fernando do poke holes in, well, how do the Chittamatrans posit some of these things? Again, the Chittamatran view is that the wisdom that we generate is the non-duality of subject and object, that what appears as subjective awareness and an object being known that is external to that is an illusion, according to the Chittamatrans. It's based on a sutra by the Buddha, or sutras by the Buddha, but it is not actually in fully qualified wisdom that will get you there to the state of omniscience. So this is what Chittamatrans say would refer explicitly to the Sugata, to the Buddha, but nonetheless, not so important. Again, for our teachings here, not as necessary. So we have a final little quote from Dignaga. It says in the Prajnaparamita Pindartha, the perfection of wisdom is the non-dual wisdom. It is the Tathagata. Because they are endowed with methods for attaining the state of a Sugata, a Buddha, Sugata means the one gone to bliss, the goal, the term, perfection of wisdom, is used to designate both text and path. And that's why, again, I had that division of 4 uses of the term perfection of wisdom, one of which included the text, and one of which includes the path realizations, and what the Bodhisattva realizes on their way to Buddhahood. And then it finally concludes with saying that same text by Dignaga says the term is used for texts and paths as well. We talk about perfection of wisdom being this omniscient mind of a Buddha, but we can also say it refers to the scriptural perfection of wisdom, the texts, and the paths, path perfection of wisdom, the realizations in a bodhisattva. Why? Because they have that object as their goal. The texts are there to teach you that. The paths are there to arrive at that final destination of the omniscient mind of a Buddha. So we didn't get into the prologue, and that's okay. We will pick up with that next time. Let me go ahead and turn it over to Shanka at this point. Did you want to say something before the break or after the break? I wasn't sure from.
You did have one question in the chat box.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get to that, and then we will have our break. I understand you to say that the mind was part of the phenomena other than persons that doesn't exist. Doesn't exist inherently. Again, could you clear this up? I thought we carried our mind stream from incarnation, but the mind is not the person. This is something we're going to realize as we get into this understanding of what is the person that exists. When we talk about the idea of an inherently existent person, that could never be equivalent to the mind, because if it was equivalent to the mind, then the mind would exist inherently as the person. So when we talk about mind and body, or the mental and physical aggregates, they are other than person. The person is simply designated to these. If the person was inherently one of those, then it would inherently exist and emptiness wouldn't exist. And we'd have lots of consequences from that, as we spoke about last week. Things couldn't change and so on. But essentially what we mean when we delineate mind is that phenomenon that is a continuum of mental moments, a sort of stream of consciousness. And of course, it's parsed up in like the course I'm teaching for the Florida group on Tuesday nights is about mind and mental factors and looking at all the various components of the mind that are parts of the mind. It doesn't have any inherent existence either. Mind is simply a label we give to this continuum of all these various mental phenomena. And then any of those specific mental phenomena, we also then, give a label to them. There's nothing that is equivalent to the person in the way that we think of the person existing. We think the person exists inherently from their own side, intrinsically. But when we look at the phenomena that are the basis for the person, the mind and the body, we don't find them to be equivalent to the person. Are you in your totality the mind only? Is that it? Is that what is who you are? There is a continuity of awareness that goes from life to life, but that doesn't mean there is a fixed person that goes from life to life. In fact, the changeability of our existences proves that we can't have that as the person, because that mind becomes the mind of the next person we are in our next life, and it was the previous person we were in the prior life, and so on. So again, the changeability of things already refutes that you could have the mind equivalent to the person. So mind is a phenomenon other than a person. Person is a phenomenon that is designated to the combination of body and mind. I don't know if that made sense, because I'm jumping ahead a little bit by talking about emptiness as we're going to get into this text and go further into an understanding of what we mean when we say emptiness in this Prasangika Madhyamaka point of view. But essentially, mind and body, the mental and physical aggregates, are phenomena other than persons. It sounds strange, but that's because the way person exists is lacking inherent existence and depending upon mere designation. We think of this as I, and that's the only way that I exists. There is no real I that is the mind. There is no real I that is the body. There is no real I that is the combination of the mind and the body. And we'll get into this deeper investigation a little bit later in the course. But this is everything that is not the person, and by person, once more, we mean that personhood that we can talk about, that is the person that was created when we were born in our womb, or conceived in the womb, and will exist until this person falls away. But then the person that we are in the intermediate state, the person that we are in our next existence, that's what we mean by person, is this person that is in the end merely imputed to a collection of stuff. The collection of stuff in this lifetime happens to be a human body with human consciousness and so on as the grosser levels of that awareness. And the continuity of mind will go on to another life, but there is no inherently existent person that is the mind. If it were equivalent to the mind, again, we would have a lot of consequences that would be problematic. So I don't know. Again, mind is a phenomenon other than persons. Everything that exists that is not a person is other than persons and is therefore falling into the category of phenomena. But as I said earlier, all these things that are phenomena other than persons as well as persons, all of them lack inherent existence. So he was pointing out, even with mind, we don't find mind existing inherently. We don't find body existing inherently. We don't find anything to exist inherently. Just the biggest problem we have is with the person, which we cling to the sense of a self in relation to the mind and body as existing in a concrete way when it doesn't have that existence at all. So again, I'm kind of throwing in a few things that we're going to be getting into as we go through this sutra. But mind, although we carry there is a mind stream that goes from life to life, incarnation to incarnation. That is not the I. That is not the person. If it were the person would inherently exist. It is simply part of the basis for a person. That might not mean much right now. It might sound more like words than it does actual concepts, but that's okay. Hang in there. And we'll be getting into this in terms of dissecting this a little bit more. if we walk away from this course and we know how many of this and how many of that, these things are, kind of relevant to our study, but they're not the deepest part of our study. And so I think it's fine, if you, again, when you do get together in discussion groups in the future, don't feel like you necessarily have to get all the answers to all the questions on the homework as much as process what was talked about or what you're thinking about and what's going on for you in it. And it's perfectly fine to ask these sorts of questions, for me to clarify points that are made that are part of the homework. But I'm going to share something that I shared in last night's class with the Florida group because they're planning to add discussion groups to their course that they're doing on minds and mental factors, the basic program course for that. And it's that when I was in Italy studying, the Geshe there, I think it may have been Geshe Tempo who was the second Geshe there. Geshe Jampa Gyatso was my guru over there. But Geshe Tempo said that when they study in the monasteries, of course, they get lessons like we do, and that's a very minimal part of their day, maybe like an hour in a Gompa where the teacher is teaching on a text. And that's 25% of their learning, they say. Another 25% is what they do on their own, taking what they receive from the teacher and processing it with their texts and their own sort of digesting of the material. The 50%, they say, comes from debate. And of course, you've all seen Tibetan debate, with the slapping of the hands and doing all this, very histrionics and what have you. It's a very intense way of learning material. We tried incorporating it in the master's program. And I think Westerners, some may have an acclamation towards it, but a lot of them don't. And we ended up having people even crying in the debates because you're on the spot and people are trying to get you to answer a question and they keep slapping and doing all this stuff. And it's a real little intense. So what we ended up doing was instead of doing debate, we did discussion groups. And maybe it's like Western debate. And that's what I'm hoping these can become as an opportunity. I don't want it again to become with, there should be no violence involved in it, but at least discuss things, say, well, this is what I heard and how I interpreted it. This is what I think this point of view is, or this view of selflessness or whatever. And then have other people saying, well, no, what I heard was this. And then maybe again, sort of, trying to noodle it out and say, but what does that really mean? Because a lot of these are words that we're putting up in front of there that are talking about concepts and their particular language that we use in this tradition. But it's more important that we even find out what does that mean for us when we are examining these things. We got into this a little bit with our group, of like, well, what does it mean to say a self-sufficient, substantially existent self in terms of our experience as opposed to those words? So this is where we do all of our learning, is when we talk about the teachings to others, when we actually, kind of get into expressing our own thoughts and then hearing others express theirs and then trying to reconcile these two against what the teacher said, against what the text is saying, against what our own experience is. And then I think it goes a lot deeper. Does that help a little bit for future discussion? But okay, anyone else, anything you'd like to share before we conclude tonight? Not wanting to keep people too late, but want to make sure that if you wanted to say something that you get a chance. Anyone? Okay, so hopefully this was useful. And again, don't think that if your group wasn't particularly useful, that's how it's going to be all the time. Things will morph and change as we do this repeatedly. And we do have, 5 more classes. So there'll be an opportunity at the end of each of them to do this type of discussion. And hopefully it will mature into something that can be really useful. And also feel free, if you want to continue discussion, you've got the chat box. You can tell somebody, that you'd like to chat with them, give them your email address or whatever, make connections outside of this, and feel free to do it outside of class too. You will find, I think, if you spend some time discussing the material with others, that your understanding of the text becomes much greater. All right, Bob, so let's go ahead and put up the prayers. Thank you for your help with that, Shanka. I really do appreciate your help, and for everyone participating in those discussion groups tonight. So let's do the first prayer here, dedicating all this merit we've created with our motivation of bodhicitta, so we attain the result that is aimed for, our own enlightenment, to lead all beings to attaining enlightenment as well. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then we recall bodhicitta and how important it is that we develop this mind very deeply in our own hearts. But let's also make prayers that others develop this mind, especially our leaders in this world. How incredible it would be if our leaders were governed by this mentality as opposed to other worldly motivations. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then finally, we do some prayers for our teachers. As we recite these 3 prayers for these specific teachers, by extension, we're creating the causes for good health and long lives for all spiritual guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally for Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. All right, and then just send out this positive energy that you've created through tonight to anyone that you know that you're holding in your heart who's experiencing difficulties, problems, illness, is dying, or who has died, and think that by virtue of this, they receive that positive potential, clears away all their suffering immediately, and causes them to have all the causes that will lead to perfect peace and happiness. And may all beings attain true peace and happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all very much. And again, know that this week's homework, we didn't get to the 3rd question, I think, which has to do with the prologue. And so we will get into that and we'll catch up over time through these 8 sessions. So, all right, thank you all so much, everyone. Take care,
Thank you,
be
John.
well, stay safe.